Hey guys, today I'd like to talk to you about the inevitability of the collapse of decentralized finance, or DeFi. So I think that anyone is going to find this a bit controversial of a statement. So what I will say is definitively that the collapse, when it happens, will be total, and it will essentially kind of take out the space largely. Now, will that be rebuildable, or will it rebuild? Very possibly. And the question becomes, can there be mechanics that are put in place that prevent this collapse? Possibly. So let's take a look at the theoretical basis for why I think that this will happen. So I think the place that I'd like to take you is to the snowy mountain peaks, because what I'd like to help you understand is complexity theory, and a specific form of complexity theory called self-organized criticality. And in order for me to explain self-organized criticality, we need to understand this concept of an avalanche. And so, we're visiting these wonderful snowy peaks in the Alps, and we're starting to think about what causes avalanches. And an avalanche is a situation where snow piles higher and higher and higher, and then at some point it's subjected to a collapse. So linear thinkers think about collapse in a very simple way, which is that they think that the cause of the collapse is maybe like a skier, right? So, in a lot of kind of alpine avalanche accidents, there is a skier, and the skier causes the avalanche, and then they're buried inside of that, and that's a big problem, right? So, this video actually just shows a very unique perspective on an avalanche, which is that of someone who's, parachuting next to an avalanche. So, they do this wonderful thing where they sort of turn their body so that you can actually see that snow falling, that huge cascade of snow. So, exciting video, but what does this have to do with DeFi? So what I'm proposing as axiomatic, if you believe it, is the idea that nonlinear systems tend to approximate this system called a self-organized criticality, and that this is isomorphic or similar mathematically to what happened in 2008 with Lehman Brothers. Right, and that what happens with this collapse is essentially if you model a system that continuously piles of sand or of snow higher and higher and higher. If it continues to pile higher, what you end up looking at is what's called a power law distribution. So what I put on the screen is actually this chart that is a power law distribution chart, and this is a log scale. So what it means, if you put it on a linear scale, is that you would see that beautiful kind of curving up hockey sticks style of graph, right? And what you would anticipate is as you keep piling up sand or snow, that you would have collapses of different sizes, and that you would have one epically large collapse, and then you would have potentially many much smaller collapses, right? So this is really research called self-organized criticality, and indeed it is mathematics. It is not physics, although it models physical systems, including brain development, obviously avalanches, and indeed stock markets. Right. And so the thing that is important to understand about self-organized criticality is that it models nonlinear systems. Right. So what I'm really holding in this thesis is I'm holding the thesis that this is indeed a situation. DeFi is a situation where the deep interconnecting of all of these smart contracts is really increasingly generative of higher and higher alpha, which is kind of like the ability to gain value. Right, and that these higher and higher alpha states, including maximizing yield, actually is a way of pumping up the energy level of the system, and that the complex interactions between these smart contracts really constitutes this kind of nonlinearity that you expect in this kind of approximating a sand pile model. Right, so if you look at the sand pile from the perspective of what happened in Lehman Brothers, what we ended up seeing is this cascading effect of collapse as a function of this highly leveraged, under-collateralized debt bubble, filled with toxic assets, and so what I'm not saying is I'm not saying that the state of DeFi has reached that level of criticality, but what I am saying is that the continuous seeking of additional yield, more and more and more yield, will actually drive the system naturally towards a criticality. And that this self-organized criticality is an emergent property of the fundamental preconditions of people seeking alpha out of a nonlinear system that's principally kind of a set of interacting algorithms. So that's really what drives my assertion that we are going to see collapse. Now, the questions that arise from this are when and then how will it collapse? So, to me, the when is actually unknown and unknowable. And this is actually really important, by the way, because if the major collapse is 10 years or 50 years in the future, it will have done even better than the centralized financial system, and so I'm not really saying that collapse is something that is happening anytime soon. So that's one thing it's unknowable as to when. The other thing that I think I want to state is that the system doesn't always have to be nonlinear. The system can be made linear. So for example, one of the things that exists in the current stock market are these kind of circuit breakers, right? So a circuit breaker, let's say the stock market starts falling into like a free fall, right? What happens is a circuit breaker is input, right? So what that is it's a mechanism that takes a nonlinear system and suddenly linearizes it. So now the system is behaving linearly, and as a result, it doesn't have the same properties as you would expect of collapse, right? So the question becomes, can such mechanisms be installed in the context of DeFi? It's unclear because there's not really a centrally governing or regulatory authority. So, installation of global circuit breakers is definitely not a practical proposal, but there may be mechanisms that enable this to circuit break at many, many local levels, and we're already seeing mechanisms like that are emergent. So, very interesting theoretical stuff. The other thing that's very interesting is that there's another way that you can introduce linearity into a system, and it's really not about preventing an avalanche, but it's actually about causing them, right? Which is that if you look at the way that the ski patrol handles snow avalanches, is that they actually go around with dynamite and they actually try to precipitate avalanches. And it turns out, for example, that exploding stick of dynamite approximates a more linear system rather than approximating a more nonlinear system. And that what that can do is that could actually create a purposeful avalanche that's smaller, right? So by deliberately creating smaller avalanches, you can actually prevent the occurrence of a larger avalanche over time, just because what we end up seeing logically are these power law distributions of avalanches that generally tend to approximate a proportional representation against the height of the pile of sand or the pile of snow. So the taller the pile gets and the steeper the angle of the incline gets on the pile, the more likelihood there is of a larger and larger imminent collapse, right? So to me, what I wanted to impart today is really just the idea that if we can hold as axiomatic that the DeFi industry approximates this kind of complex self-organized criticality, that based on that model, what we will see then is we will see collapse. And, I think if you were to take the metaphor of Lehman Brothers 2008, we are seeing increases in leverage. We are seeing, leverage debt instruments, and we are seeing the emergence of derivatives. So I think with all of these functions occurring in the DeFi industry, I do think that without appropriate mechanisms that potentially linearize in both directions the energy system within DeFi, we will experience collapses of various sizes along a power law distribution. So that's what makes me assert that collapse in DeFi is inevitable. So thanks for listening. I think this is a controversial position for me to take, and I don't want people to understand it to be my lack of support for DeFi, right? Because as a venture class investor, my belief is that, obviously if the collapse happens in 50 years or even in 10 years, it's still a venture class investment opportunity. So, it's exciting, and obviously centralized finance is already known and proven to collapse. So therefore, there's no reason why we should be afraid of any of these properties, we should just continue to build systems and continue to build systems that have unique, differentiated, and valuable properties. So that's my take on this. Thank you very much. And I'd love to hear your comments. So please leave some comments below. And I'd love to answer any questions you may have about this video or about my position according to DeFi. Thanks very much.